Rachel had just settled into the quiet rhythm of her evening, savoring the rare moment of stillness in her bustling life. The soft hum of the dishwasher and the faint glow of the kitchen light were her only companions as she sipped her tea. The apartment felt peaceful, almost serene, until the sharp buzz of the doorbell shattered the calm. She frowned, setting her mug down with a soft clink. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, she saw her younger sister Lena standing there with a bright but slightly forced smile. Rachel hesitated, her hand lingering on the doorknob. Lena had a habit of showing up unannounced, but tonight her presence felt more unsettling than usual. There was something about the way Lena's eyes darted around the hallway, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, that made Rachel's stomach tighten. She opened the door, the cool evening air rushing in. "Lena," she said, her voice warm but cautious, "this is a surprise." Lena stepped inside, her energy almost palpable. "I've been dying for a little getaway," she said breezily, brushing past Rachel with a suitcase in tow. "Thought I'd crash here for a few days. You don't mind, do you?" Rachel forced a smile, though her unease grew. "Of course not, you're always welcome." Lena's arrival was like a gust of wind, sweeping through the apartment, disrupting the fragile calm. She was younger than Rachel by 5 years, but her confidence and charisma often made her feel like the older sister. Lena's presence was always intense, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this visit would be no different. The sound of the shower running in the background filled the apartment, a steady hum that seemed to underscore the tension. Noah, Rachel's 19-year-old stepson, was home. Lena's eyes flicked toward the sound, her curiosity piqued. "Someone's here?" she asked, her tone light but tinged with something else, something Rachel couldn't quite place. "Noah," Rachel replied quickly, her voice steady despite the prickle of unease crawling up her neck. "He's been staying with me since, well, you know." Lena nodded, her gaze lingering in the direction of the bathroom. "How's he doing?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Rachel hesitated, unsure how much to share. "He's adjusting," she said finally, choosing her words carefully. "It's been hard for both of us. Since her husband Greg had left 2 years ago, Rachel had been trying to hold her blended family together. It hadn't been easy. Noah, Greg's son from a previous relationship, had moved in with her after the breakup, and their relationship had been fraught with tension from the start. Rachel struggled to connect with him, their interactions often laced with unspoken resentment. She felt like an outsider in her own home, a role she hadn't anticipated when she married Greg. Noah's quiet defiance and her own insecurities as a stepmother had created a chasm between them that seemed impossible to bridge. He was polite but distant, his teenage aloofness magnified by the upheaval in their lives. Rachel had tried to reach out to find common ground, but it felt like every step she took only drove them further apart. Lena wandered into the living room, her movements easy and familiar as though she belonged there. "This place hasn't changed much," she remarked, running a finger along the edge of the coffee table. Rachel followed her, her unease growing. "Yeah, well, I haven't had much time for redecorating," she said, her tone dry. Lena laughed, the sound light and melodic, but it didn't ease Rachel's tension. She sat down on the couch, crossing her legs and looking up at Rachel with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "So what's new with you?" Rachel sighed, sitting down across from her. "Not much, work's been busy and well, you know how it is." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the shower turning off. Rachel's eyes flicked toward the hallway, her nerves jangling. She didn't know why, but the thought of Noah and Lena in the same space made her uncomfortable. "So Noah's here," Lena said, her tone casual but her gaze sharp. "How's that working out for you?" Rachel shrugged, her shoulders tense. "It's complicated," she said finally. Lena nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I bet," she said softly. Lena had always been the type to act first and think later. After Rachel retreated to her room for the night, Lena decided to take a shower. She grabbed a towel from the linen closet and made her way to the bathroom, humming softly to herself. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open without a second thought. The sight that greeted her stopped her in her tracks. Noah was there, standing in front of the sink, his towel slung low around his hips. He froze, his eyes widening in shock as he caught sight of Lena in the mirror. For a moment, neither of them moved. Lena's breath caught in her throat as her eyes traveled over him, taking in the unexpected sight. Noah's cheeks flushed scarlet, and he quickly turned away, fumbling with his towel. Sorry, Noah stammered, his voice thick with embarrassment. I didn't think anyone would come in. Lena's initial shock gave way to something else. A flicker of amusement, perhaps, or something more mischievous. She leaned against the doorframe, her lips curling into a sly smile. Well, this is awkward, she said, her tone teasing. Noah glanced at her warily, his body tense. I'll get out of here, he muttered, reaching for his clothes. Lena stepped closer, her movement slow and deliberate. No need to rush on my account, she said, her voice low. You've got nothing to be embarrassed about. Noah's eyes widened, his discomfort palpable. Lena, She cut him off with a soft laugh, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture that was both comforting and unnerving. Relax, Noah, she said, her tone light but her gaze intense. It's just a little harmless teasing. Her eyes flicked downward, her smile widening as she noticed his reaction to the situation. Well, she murmured, her hand moving to trace a faint line along his chest. Looks like someone's a little nervous. Noah's breath hitched, his body stiffening under her touch. Lena, don't! She shushed him gently, her fingers trailing lower, just grazing the edge of his towel. It's okay, she whispered, her voice soft but firm. It's just us. For a moment, Noah seemed frozen, caught between embarrassment and something else. Something that made his pulse race and his thoughts scatter. But before he could react, Lena pulled away, stepping back with a playful smile. I'll let you finish up, she said, her tone casual again, as though nothing had happened. She turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving Noah standing there, his mind reeling. The next morning, the apartment felt unusually quiet. The kind of silence that seemed to hum with unspoken tension. Rachel stood in the kitchen, her coffee mug in hand, glancing between Lena and Noah as they sat at the breakfast table. Lena seemed perfectly at ease, humming softly as she buttered her toast, while Noah kept his eyes glued to his cereal bowl, his shoulders tense. Rachel tried to break the silence. So what are you two planning to do today? Lena shrugged, her tone casual. Not much, maybe I'll explore the neighborhood, it's been a while since I've been here. Noah muttered something unintelligible under his breath, his spoon clinking against the bowl. Rachel frowned, sensing the awkwardness but unsure of its source. Noah, you okay? She asked. He nodded quickly, still avoiding her gaze. Yeah, just tired. Rachel sighed, deciding not to press the issue. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. Okay, well, I'm off to work, you two behave, she said, her voice light but her eyes lingering on Lena. Lena smiled, her expression innocent. We'll be fine, Rachel, don't worry about us. The moment the door closed behind Rachel, the atmosphere in the apartment shifted. Noah sank into the couch, flipping through TV channels with little interest. Lena, on the other hand, seemed to come alive. She moved around the house in a short summer dress, her movements fluid and deliberate. She bent over to pick up stray magazines, adjusted cushions on the couch, and straightened picture frames, all while Noah tried and failed to ignore her. At one point, Lena paused in front of the TV, blocking Noah's view. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a teasing smile. You've been awfully quiet today, she said, her voice light but her eyes sharp. Noah shrugged, keeping his gaze fixed on the TV. Just not much to say. Lena stepped closer, leaning down until her face was inches from his. Are you sure that's all it is? She asked, her tone dropping to a whisper. You seem a little tense. Noah's jaw tightened and he shifted uncomfortably. I'm fine. Lena laughed softly, straightening up. Relax, Noah, she said, brushing past him. Her hand lingered on his shoulder for a moment longer than necessary. I'm just teasing. Noah exhaled slowly, his heart racing as Lena moved away. She continued her tasks, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were putting on a show. Every now and then she would glance at him, her smile widening when she caught him looking. As the day went on, the tension between them grew unspoken but undeniable. When Rachel returned home that evening, Lena was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. While Noah sat at the table, his attention fixed on his phone. "How was your day?" Rachel asked as she set her bag down. Lena glanced over her shoulder, her smile bright. "Oh, it was fine, just hung around here most of the day." Noah mumbled a non-committal response, his eyes never leaving his phone. Rachel frowned, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. The three of them sat down to dinner. The conversation was stilted and awkward. Rachel tried to engage them in small talk, but Lena's responses were vague. And Noah barely spoke at all. Under the table, Lena reached over to Noah's thigh, her touch light but deliberate. He stiffened, his fork clinking against his plate as he tried to maintain his composure. Rachel glanced at him, her brow furrowing. "Everything okay, Noah?" He nodded quickly, his voice strained. "Yeah, I'm fine." Lena's hand moved higher, her fingers teasing the edge of his pants. Noah's breath hitched, and he shifted in his seat, his face flushing scarlet. Rachel, oblivious to what was happening, continued eating, her attention focused on her plate. Lena's gaze flicked toward Noah, her lips curling into a sly smile. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but laced with amusement. "You seem a little jumpy tonight," she said, her tone innocent. Noah's jaw tightened and he glanced at her warily. "I'm fine," he said, his voice strained. Lena's hand lingered for a moment longer before she pulled away, her expression calm as she turned back to Rachel. "So Rachel, how was work?" Rachel sighed, launching into a story about her day, completely unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. After dinner, everyone retreated to their rooms. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that dared to break the night's silence. Noah lay flat on his back, the sheets tangled around his legs, the weight of the day pressing down on him like a second blanket. His door groaned softly, a whisper of hinges protesting, and he turned his head sharply. Lena stood framed in the doorway, the dim glow from the hallway silhouetting her figure. Her nightshirt, thin and silky, clung to her like moonlight, shifting with every breath she took. Her hair, loose and messy, tumbled over her shoulders, and her lips curved into a smile that was equal parts mischief and something darker. "Hey," she said softly, her voice low like she was sharing a secret. Noah blinked, his brain stumbling over the sight of her. "What are you doing here?" She stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind her. "Couldn't sleep," she said, tilting her head as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Figured you couldn't either." He stared at her, his mouth dry. "I'm fine." She laughed, a soft exhale that made the air feel heavier. "Sure you are," she said, her tone dripping with amusement. She moved closer, her bare feet silent against the carpet, and sat on the edge of his bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. Noah's pulse thrummed in his ears. "Lena, relax," she said, her hand brushing his arm like she was calming a spooked animal. "I just need your help to unwind, that's all." Before he could argue, she slid onto the bed beside him, her body stretching out with a deliberate languor. She shifted her leg, brushing against his, and Noah's breath hitched. The warmth of her skin seeped through the thin fabric of his shirt, and he felt his body betray him, reacting to her closeness in a way he couldn't rationalize. Her head turned, her eyes locking with his. "You're wound so tight," she murmured, her voice a soft purr. "Let me fix that." Her hand drifted to his chest, her fingers tracing lazy patterns over his shirt. Noah's heart hammered, his thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. "Lena," he started, his voice unsteady. She silenced him with a look, her eyes daring him to object. Her fingers slipped lower under the waistband of his boxers, and Noah's world narrowed to the feel of her hand on him. Her touch was firm but unhurried, her movements deliberate, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. Noah's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the sheets as if they could anchor him. "Better?" she asked, her tone light but her gaze heavy. He didn't answer. Couldn't answer. His body was a taut wire, every nerve firing in response to her. Lena leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "Let go," she whispered, her voice soft but commanding. Noah's control unraveled. His back arched, his breath catching in his throat as he peeked. She didn't stop, didn't rush. Her touch was steady, guiding him through it until he collapsed back against the mattress, his chest heaving. Lena sat up, her hand sliding away. She smiled, the corners of her mouth lifting in a way that made Noah's stomach twist. "Sleep well," she said, her voice a low hum. She stood, her nightshirt whispering against her skin, and walked to the door. She paused, glancing back at him. "Sweet dreams, Noah." The door clicked shut, leaving him alone in the dark. The idea of going to the summer house came up over breakfast. Lena, seated at the kitchen table with a piece of toast in one hand and her phone in the other, glanced up at Rachel. "You know what we should do today?" she asked, her voice light but with a spark of mischief in her eyes. Rachel, leaning against the counter with her coffee mug, raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Lena grinned. "Let's go to the summer house. It's been forever since we've been there, and it's supposed to be a perfect day for the pool." Rachel hesitated, glancing at Noah, who was sitting quietly at the table, his cereal untouched. "I don't know. I've got a lot of work to catch up on." Lena rolled her eyes. "Come on, Rachel, when was the last time you took a day off? You've been buried in work for weeks. You need this, we all do." Noah shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the table. "I'm fine here," he muttered. Lena turned to him, her smile widening. "You're coming too, Noah, no arguments, it'll be fun." Rachel sighed, setting her coffee mug down. "All right, fine, but we're not staying overnight, just a day trip." Lena clapped her hands, her excitement palpable. "Perfect, I'll pack the cooler." An hour later they were on the road, the summer house just a short drive away. The journey was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy with unspoken tension. Lena sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone and occasionally humming along to the radio. Rachel focused on the road, her hands tight on the steering wheel. Noah sat in the back seat, his headphones on but not playing anything, his gaze fixed on the blur of trees outside. When they arrived, the summer house looked exactly as Rachel remembered it. A whitewashed cottage with a wraparound porch and a pool that sparkled in the sunlight. The air was warm, the scent of pine trees and fresh earth filling her lungs. Lena was the first one out of the car, her energy almost infectious. She grabbed the cooler from the trunk and headed straight for the pool, her laughter ringing out as she dipped her toes in the water. Rachel followed more slowly, carrying a bag of towels and sunscreen. She spread a towel on one of the lounge chairs, tilting her face to the sun. "This is nice," she said, her voice soft, "just what we needed." Noah lingered by the car, his hands shoved in his pockets. "I'll just hang out here," he said, his tone hesitant. Lena glanced over at him, her lips curving into a sly smile. "Come on, Noah, you're not going to sit in the car all day, are you?" He shrugged, his gaze flicking toward the pool. "Maybe later." Lena climbed out of the pool, water dripping from her bright red bikini as she walked toward him. She grabbed a towel, her movement slow and deliberate, her gaze lingering on his face. "You should get in," she said, her voice light but her eyes sharp. "The water's perfect." Noah shook his head. "I'm good." Lena shrugged, dropping the towel on the edge of the pool. "Suit yourself." She moved closer, brushing against him as she reached for the sunscreen on the table. Her skin was cool from the water and the touch sent a jolt through Noah's body. "Help me with this?" she asked, holding out the bottle to Rachel. Rachel took it, squinting at the label. "Sure." She squeezed some lotion into her hands and began applying it to Lena's shoulders. Lena tilted her head, closing her eyes as Rachel worked the lotion into her skin. "Thanks," she murmured. Rachel smiled, her hands moving down Lena's back. "No problem." Lena's eyes flicked open, her gaze locking with Noah's. "You should help too," she said, her tone playful but her eyes intense. Noah's heart skipped a beat. "I'm good." Lena laughed, the sound light and melodic. "Come on, Noah, don't be shy." Rachel glanced between them, her brow furrowing slightly. "Be careful around her," she joked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "She's trouble." Lena grinned, her gaze never leaving Noah's. "Trouble's more fun, isn't it?" Rachel finished applying the sunscreen and handed the bottle back to Lena. "There you go, all set." Lena took the bottle, her smile widening as she turned back to Noah. "Your turn." Noah shook his head, his heart racing. "I'm fine, thanks." Lena laughed, setting the bottle down. "Suit yourself." She moved to the edge of the pool, her movement slow and deliberate. She glanced over her shoulder, her smile turning sly. You know, since we're all family here, maybe I should just go all out. Rachel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Lena's hands moved to the back of her bikini top, her fingers unhooking the clasp. Why bother with a swimsuit? We're all adults. Rachel's eyes widened, but before she could say anything, Lena dropped the top on the ground, her bare skin gleaming in the sunlight. Noah's breath caught in his throat, his gaze darting away as heat flooded his cheeks. Lena laughed, the sound light and carefree. Relax, Noah, she said, her tone teasing. It's just skin. Rachel stared at her sister, a mix of shock and amusement on her face. You're unbelievable, she said, shaking her head. Lena grinned, stretching her arms above her head. Life's too short to be shy. Rachel hesitated for a moment before shrugging off her own top, her movements deliberate but confident. If you can't beat him, join him, she said, her tone light but her smile a little self-conscious. Noah's eyes widened, his gaze flicking between the two women. He felt like he'd stepped into another world, one where the rules didn't apply and anything was possible. Lena laughed, clapping her hands. That's the spirit, she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Lena said, her tone teasing. Which means it'll be more interesting. Noah hesitated, his gaze flicking between the two women. I don't think. Come on, Noah, Lena interrupted, her voice light but insistent. Don't be boring. Rachel sighed, leaning back in her chair. All right, fine, but I'm warning you, Lena, I'm not holding back. Lena grinned, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Neither am I. The game started innocently enough, with Lena asking questions like, never have I ever been late to work, and Rachel countering with, never have I ever forgotten someone's birthday. But it didn't take long for the tone to shift. Lena took a sip of her wine, her gaze locking with Noah's. Never have I ever had a threesome, she said, her voice casual but her eyes sharp. Rachel raised an eyebrow, glancing at Lena. Really, Lena? Lena shrugged, her smirk widening. Just asking the real questions. Noah froze, his cheeks flushing scarlet. He didn't drink his silence all the confirmation they needed. Lena laughed, the sound light but laced with amusement. Looks like you're the odd one out, Noah. Rachel glanced at him, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. Well, that's unexpected. Noah's hands clenched into fists under the table, his discomfort palpable. Can we not? Lena leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her gaze locking with his. Why, it's just a game. Unless. Her voice trailed off, her smile turning sly. Noah's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Unless what? Lena's smirk widened. Unless you're curious. Rachel laughed nervously, though there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Something that made Noah's stomach twist. Lena, stop, you're embarrassing him. Lena shrugged, leaning back in her chair. Fine, but I think we all know who's holding back here. Noah's face burned, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to leave, to get as far away from this conversation as possible. But he couldn't move, couldn't speak. Lena's smile softened, though her eyes remained sharp. You know, Noah, you're not as mysterious as you think you are. Noah's breath hitched, his gaze flicking toward Rachel, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. Lena took another sip of her wine, her tone light but her words cutting. Like last night, for example, I didn't think you'd be so impressive. Rachel's eyes widened, her gaze snapping to Lena. What are you talking about? Lena's smile turned smug, her gaze never leaving Noah's face. Oh, you know, just a little late-night visit to his room. He's quite the surprise. Noah's blood ran cold, his mind racing. He wanted to protest, to deny it, but the words caught in his throat. Rachel stared at Lena, her brow furrowing. What do you mean, Lena? Lena shrugged, her tone casual but her eyes intense. Exactly what I said. I stopped by his room last night, and let's just say I wasn't disappointed. Rachel's gaze flicked toward Noah, her expression a mix of shock and something else. Something that made his stomach churn. Is that true? Noah's mouth went dry, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know how to respond. Didn't know what to say. Lena laughed, the sound light but laced with amusement. Don't be shy, Noah. Rachel's just curious. Rachel's eyes narrowed, her gaze locking with Noah's. Show me. Noah's breath caught in his throat, his mind reeling. What? Rachel's expression was unreadable, her voice firm. Show me, I want to see. Noah's world tilted on its axis, his heart pounding in his ears. He wanted to refuse, to walk away, but the intensity in Rachel's gaze held him in place. Lena's smile widened, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Go on, Noah, don't keep us waiting. Noah's hands trembled as he slowly stood up, his heart racing. He felt like he was in a dream or a nightmare. Rachel's gaze never left his, her expression a mix of curiosity and something darker. Something primal. Lena leaned back in her chair, her smile smug, her eyes gleaming with triumph. The candles on the table flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Noah sat on the couch, his posture stiff, his hands gripping the edge of the cushions like he was bracing for something. Lena stood in front of him, her hips swaying to the rhythm of a song only she could hear. Her movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. Relax, Noah, she purred, her voice low and velvety. You're in good hands. Rachel lingered by the side of the room, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. She'd been drawn into this moment, her initial shock giving way to something darker, something she couldn't quite name. Lena turned to her sister, her lips curling into a sly smile. Come on, Rachel, she said, her tone teasing. You're not just going to stand there, are you? Rachel hesitated, her gaze flicking toward Noah, who looked like he was about to bolt at any second. Lena, this is fun, Lena finished for her, stepping closer. It's supposed to be fun, let go for once. Lena reached out, her fingers grazing Rachel's arm, and Rachel's resistance crumbled. She stepped forward, her movements tentative at first, but as the music real or imagined wrapped around her, she began to sway, her body mirroring Lena's. Noah watched, his breath shallow, his heart pounding in his chest. The sisters moved together, their bodies brushing against each other in a way that felt both natural and forbidden. Lena's hand slid to Rachel's waist, pulling her closer. And Rachel didn't resist. Their lips met. A slow, deliberate kiss that sent a jolt through Noah's body. He couldn't look away, his mind reeling, as the two women he'd known his entire life seemed to transform before his eyes. When they pulled apart, Lena's smile was triumphant. See, she said, her voice soft but firm. Nothing to be afraid of. Rachel's cheeks were flushed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. But there was a glint in her eyes. A spark of something wild, something untamed. Lena turned back to Noah, her movement slow and deliberate as she began to unbutton her blouse. The fabric slipped from her shoulders, revealing a lace bralette that clung to her like a second skin. Rachel followed suit, her hands trembling slightly as she undid the buttons of her own shirt. Noah's pulse quickened, his gaze flicking between them as they shed their clothes, revealing lingerie that was as daring as it was beautiful. Lena stepped closer, her hips swaying as she knelt in front of him. Your turn, she murmured, her fingers brushing against his jaw. Noah's breath hitched, his body tensing as Lena leaned in, her lips brushing against his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened, her hand sliding to his chest. Rachel watched, her own heart racing, before she moved closer, her hand resting on Noah's shoulder. She leaned down, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was slow and deliberate, her touch sending a shiver down his spine. Lena's hands trailed lower, her fingers brushing against the waistband of his pants. Let's see what we've been missing, she said, her voice a low purr. Noah's hands clenched into fists, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He wanted to stop this, to push them away, but his body betrayed him, reacting to their touch in a way he couldn't control. Lena's fingers worked at the button of his pants, her movements unhurried, deliberate. When she pulled them down, Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Wow, Rachel murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Lena wasn't kidding. Lena laughed softly, her eyes gleaming with mischief. Told you. Noah's cheeks burned, his gaze flicking toward Rachel, who was staring at him with a mix of shock and something else. Something that made his stomach twist. Lena leaned in, her lips brushing against his ear. "Now it's your turn to show us what you can do," she whispered, her voice low and sultry. Noah hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to respond, but the intensity in their eyes held him in place. Lena's hand brushed against his thigh, her touch light but insistent. "Go on," she said, her tone soft but firm. Noah's breath hitched, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached down, his hand trembling as he began to move his hand. The sisters watched, their gazes heavy, their breath shallow. Lena's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "There you go," she murmured, her voice soft but laced with approval. Rachel's cheeks were flushed, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. She'd never imagined herself in a situation like this, but now that she was here, she couldn't look away. The warmth of the light played across their skin, casting shadows that danced and shifted with every breath they took. Noah's breath hitched, his hand trembling as he continued to move it slowly, the sisters watching him with intense, unblinking gazes. Lena's lips curved into a knowing smile, her eyes gleaming with mischief and something darker, something that made Noah's stomach twist. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, like a cat stalking its prey. Her bare feet made no sound against the carpet, but the weight of her presence was palpable. She knelt before him, her eyes never leaving his, her hands resting lightly on his knees. "Don't stop," she murmured, her voice low and velvety, a sound that seemed to wrap around him like a warm blanket. "Let us watch you." Rachel hesitated for a moment, her gaze flicking between Lena and Noah. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a hesitation that spoke of the moral boundaries she was crossing. But then she exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as she stepped forward, joining Lena on the floor. Her movements were less assured than her sister's, but there was a quiet determination in the way she knelt beside her. Her hands trembling slightly as she reached out to touch Noah's thigh. Noah's breath hitched, his body stiffening under their touch. He wanted to speak, to protest, but the words caught in his throat, tangled in the web of desire and confusion that had ensnared him. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, shame, curiosity, and a raw primal need that he couldn't ignore. Lena's hands trailed upward, her fingers brushing against his where he moved. She glanced up at him, her lips curving into a sly smile. "You're doing so well," she said, her tone light but her gaze heavy with intent. Rachel's hand joined Lena's, her touch tentative at first but growing bolder as she mirrored her sister's encouragement. Together they guided his movements, their hands overlapping his, their breaths mingling as they leaned closer. The sensations were overwhelming, a tidal wave of pleasure that threatened to drown him. Noah's hands gripped the edge of the couch, his knuckles white as he fought to keep his composure. His breath came in shallow gasps, his heart pounding in his chest as the sisters took turns brushing against him, their touches growing bolder with every passing second. Lena's hand brushed against Rachel's, guiding her, showing her the rhythm, the pressure, the timing. Rachel followed her lead, her hesitation giving way to confidence as she matched her sister's pace. Their lips met over a slow, deliberate kiss that was as much about their connection as it was about the act itself. Noah's breath caught in his throat, his body arching as the pleasure built inside him, a fire that threatened to consume him. The room was a blur of warmth and motion, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that danced on the walls. The sisters moved together in perfect harmony, their touches alternating between teasing and intense. Lena's laughter soft and breathy mixed with Rachel's murmurs of encouragement, the sounds weaving together into a symphony of desire. Noah's thoughts scattered, his mind a blank canvas painted with nothing but sensation. The world outside the room ceased to exist. The only reality, the warmth of their hands, the softness of them, the intoxicating rhythm of their movements. When the family came, it was like a thunderclap, left him breathless and trembling. The sisters shared a knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of the line they had crossed, the bond they had forged in that moment. Noah collapsed back against the couch, his chest heaving, his heart still racing. He felt spent, his body heavy with the weight of what had just happened. The room was silent now, the only sound the soft flicker of the candles and the quiet rustle of fabric as the sisters adjusted their positions. Lena stood first, her movements graceful and unhurried. She reached out, her hand brushing against Noah's cheek in a gesture that was almost tender. "Sweet dreams," she murmured, her voice soft but laced with a hint of mischief. Rachel hesitated for a moment longer, her gaze lingering on Noah's face. There was a new awareness in her eyes, a realization of something she couldn't yet name. She stood slowly, her movements more deliberate, her expression thoughtful. They left the room together, their footsteps soft against the carpet, the door clicking shut behind them. Noah remained on the couch, his mind racing, his body still thrumming with the aftershocks of what had just happened. He sat up slowly, his muscles aching with the effort, his body still humming with the echoes of pleasure. His gaze flicked toward the closed door of the sisters' room, a flicker of something raw and unspoken tugging at him. He hesitated for a moment, his breath catching in his throat, before he pushed himself to his feet. The floor was cool beneath his bare feet as he crossed the room, his steps deliberate but unsteady. His pulse quickened with each step, the weight of the night's events pressing down on him like a second skin. He paused outside their door, his hand hovering over the handle, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and desire. But the pull was too strong, the need too insistent. He turned the handle and pushed the door open, the soft creak of the hinges cutting through the silence like a knife. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow of the moon filtering through the curtains and casting the sisters in a soft silvery light. They lay in bed, their bodies tangled in the sheets, their breath slow and even. For a moment Noah stood there, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what to do. But then Lena stirred, her eyes fluttering open as she turned to face him, her lips curled into a sly smile, her gaze sharp and knowing. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured, her voice low and velvety, a sound that sent a shiver down his spine. Noah didn't answer, his throat too dry to form words. Instead, he stepped forward, the air between them crackling with an electric intensity. Rachel shifted beside her sister, her eyes opening slowly, her expression a mix of surprise and something darker. Something he couldn't quite name. Lena sat up, the sheets slipping down to reveal the curve of her shoulders, her skin glowing in the moonlight. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his arm in a gesture that was both comforting and unnerving. "Come here," she said, her tone soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. Noah hesitated for a moment longer before he climbed onto the bed, his movements slow and deliberate. The mattress dipped under his weight, the sisters shifting to make room for him. Lena's hand slid to the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer. Her lips brushing against his in a kiss that was soft and teasing. Rachel watched them for a moment, her eyes dark with something that made Noah's stomach twist. She reached out her hand, brushing against his chest, her touch tentative at first but growing bolder as she leaned in. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're here." The words seemed to break something inside him. A dam of restraint he hadn't realized he'd been holding onto. He pulled Rachel closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was slow and deliberate, his hand tangling in her hair. Lena's lips brushed against his shoulder, her touch sending a jolt through his body as she guided him. The room was alive with the sounds of their breaths, the rustle of sheets, the soft murmurs that passed between them. Noah's world narrowed to the feel of their hands on his skin, the warmth of their bodies pressed against his, the intoxicating rhythm of their movements. The tension that had been building all weekend finally reached its peak, a fire that consumed them all and left them breathless and spent. Noah collapsed back against the mattress, his chest heaving, his heart still racing. The sisters lay beside him, their breath shallow, their bodies tangled together in a way that felt both natural and forbidden. For a long moment no one spoke, the silence heavy with the weight of what they'd just done. Noah stared up at the ceiling, his mind reeling, his body still thrumming with the aftershocks of pleasure. Lena turned to him, her lips curling into a sly smile. "Better," she murmured, her voice low and teasing. Noah didn't answer, his gaze flicking toward Rachel, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. There was a new awareness in her eyes, a realization of something she couldn't yet